On August 5, 2023, Rachel Morin went to the Ma and Pa Trail in Bel Air, Maryland. She did not come home. Her car was still near the trail. The next day, searchers found her body. For months, police had no face to show the public. They had DNA. That DNA led from Maryland to another violent case in Los Angeles, then to Oklahoma, where Victor Martinez-Hernandez was arrested. Later, he was sentenced to life without parole. But the question is how one evening run turned into a case that crossed the country. Rachel Morin was 37 years old. She lived in Maryland, had 5 children, and in Bel Air, the Ma and Pa Trail was not some isolated place people avoided. It was part of normal life there. People used it to walk, run, take their dogs out, or clear their head before going home. That is what made the first hours of this case feel so wrong. On Saturday, August 5, 2023, Rachel went to the trail in the early evening. At first, nothing about that sounded strange. She knew the area. Other people used the same path. It was still the kind of place where a person could go for a run and expect to come back without anyone thinking twice. But Rachel did not come back. The first fear was not a murder case. Not yet. In the beginning, people could still reach for normal explanations. A dead phone. A delay. A message that did not go through. Something simple enough to explain why she was not answering. Then more time passed. The simple answers started to feel weak. People close to Rachel began checking the places that made sense first, and the trail was one of them. If she had left on her own, there should have been some clear sign of where she went next. Instead, her car was still near the trail. That changed the weight of everything. A phone can die. Someone can run late. But when a car is left behind near the last place a person was known to be, it becomes much harder to pretend the situation is ordinary. By late that night, Rachel was reported missing. At that moment, the public did not know the name Victor Martinez-Hernandez. They did not know about DNA, another case in Los Angeles, or an arrest that would come months later in Oklahoma. All they knew was that a woman had gone to a local trail and had not come home. The next morning, the search moved through the area around the Ma and Pa Trail. Volunteers and law enforcement looked through ground that had never felt dangerous to most people who lived there. A familiar path became a place people searched slowly, carefully, hoping for one answer and fearing another. Then the case changed. Rachel was found near the trail. After that, this was no longer only a missing person report. It was a homicide investigation. And the question facing investigators was no longer where Rachel had gone. It was who had been on that trail with her. By Sunday morning, the search was focused around the Ma and Pa Trail. Rachel had been missing through the night. Her car was still near the area, and that made it harder for anyone to believe she had simply left on her own. People were looking through a place that many of them already knew. This was not some abandoned road outside town. It was a trail locals used all the time. Runners, walkers, families, people with dogs. That was the uncomfortable part. The scene did not look dangerous until Rachel was gone. Searchers moved through the trail and the ground around it. They checked areas that would be easy to miss from the path. Brush. Edges. Lower spots near the trail. Places a person might pass without stopping. Then they found her. Rachel was discovered near the trail, close enough to make the whole area part of the investigation. After that, the case changed. Police were no longer only looking for a missing woman. They were dealing with a homicide. For Rachel's family, the search had ended in the worst possible way. For Bel Air, something familiar had been taken away too. A place people used without fear was now the center of a murder investigation. The question became very practical. Who was there that evening? Not in a dramatic way. Not as a theory. Investigators needed real names, real times, and real pieces of video. The Harford County Sheriff's Office asked anyone who had been near the Ma and Pa Trail that Saturday to come forward, especially people around the Williams Street and Ellendale Street area between 5 p.m. and 11 p.m. That was the window they had to rebuild. Rachel had gone out during those hours. Somewhere inside that same stretch of time, someone else was there too. Police needed anything that could narrow it down. A camera from a house nearby. A dashcam from a parked car. A phone video. A person who remembered seeing someone on the trail and did not think much of it at the time. Small details mattered because there was no easy suspect standing in front of them. The killer was not waiting at the scene. He had already left. So investigators had to start with what remained: Rachel's car, the trail, the time window, and whatever evidence had been left behind. At that point, the public still did not know where this case would go. They did not know it would reach Los Angeles. They did not know it would end with an arrest in Oklahoma. But the first real path forward was already there. It was not a witness. It was DNA. The next part of the case started with evidence Rachel could not speak for herself. Investigators had DNA. That changed the investigation, but it did not make it simple. A DNA match can point police in a direction, but it does not always hand them a name on the first day. In Rachel's case, the DNA did something important. It connected the murder in Maryland to another case on the other side of the country. Months before Rachel was killed, there had been a violent home invasion in Los Angeles. A woman and her young daughter were attacked inside a home. The man left, but he did not leave cleanly. Evidence from that case was still there. When investigators compared what they had from Rachel's case, the connection became hard to ignore. The same unknown man appeared to be tied to both crimes. That was the moment this case stopped looking like something that only belonged to Bel Air. A woman had been killed near a local trail in Maryland. Now police were looking at a case from California, months earlier, with the same DNA pointing back at one man. But they still had a problem. They did not have him standing in front of them. They had a biological link. They had a previous case. They had surveillance footage from Los Angeles showing a man connected to that attack. So police released the footage. For people in Maryland, it was a strange thing to see. The video was not from their town. It was not from the Ma and Pa Trail. It showed a man in California, walking away from a house months before Rachel ever went missing. But that man mattered now. Investigators needed the public to look at him carefully, because someone out there might know his face, his build, his walk, or where he had gone after Los Angeles. The case had become wider than one trail. Rachel's murder was still the center of it, but the evidence was pulling investigators across the country. They were no longer only asking who had been on the Ma and Pa Trail that evening. They were asking who this man was before he ever reached Maryland. That question mattered, because if the same person had been connected to a violent case in Los Angeles and then Rachel's murder in Bel Air, police had to assume he could move again. DNA gave them the connection. The footage gave them a face. But the name was still missing. And until they had that name, they were not hunting a suspect in court records. They were hunting an unknown man who had already left 2 crime scenes behind. The DNA did not solve Rachel's case in one clean moment. It gave investigators a direction, and after that came the slower work. They still had to find the person behind the evidence. For a while, the public only had the footage from Los Angeles. A man was seen leaving a house after a violent home invasion. The video was months old, and it was from the other side of the country, but investigators believed it mattered to Rachel's murder in Maryland. That was the problem. They were not only looking for someone who had been on the Ma and Pa Trail. They were looking for a man who may have moved from one state to another, leaving behind pieces of himself without leaving behind a simple name. Police went back through the Los Angeles case, the evidence from Maryland, and the people who might recognize the man in the video. Over time, one name moved closer to the center: Victor Martinez-Hernandez. He was not a familiar local suspect from Bel Air, and that made the search harder. Investigators had to build the route around him. Where had he been? Who had seen him? How close had he been to Maryland when Rachel was killed? A relative later told investigators he had stayed in Temple Hills, Maryland, and then left after Rachel's death. That did not answer everything, but it made the timeline harder to ignore. Now the man from the Los Angeles footage was no longer only a stranger on a screen. There was a possible path into Maryland, and the evidence from Rachel's case was already pointing in his direction. Then the search reached Oklahoma. Almost 10 months after Rachel disappeared, authorities found Martinez-Hernandez in Tulsa. He was far from the trail, far from Bel Air, and far from the place where Rachel had been found. He was sitting in a bar when police arrested him. When questioned, he denied being involved. He also denied ever being in Maryland. Then investigators looked at his phone. According to law enforcement, they found searches connected to the Bel Air area and images of Rachel Morin. That made his denial much harder to carry. For Rachel's family, the arrest was not justice yet. It did not bring her back, and it did not explain every hour of what happened on that trail. But after months of looking for an unknown man, police finally had someone in custody. The case was no longer only about finding him. Now prosecutors had to prove that the man arrested in Oklahoma was the same man who had crossed Rachel's path in Maryland. By the time Victor Martinez-Hernandez went to trial, Rachel Morin's case was no longer only about a trail in Bel Air. It had become a case built through DNA, surveillance footage, phone evidence, witness statements, and months of police work across more than one state. But court is different from an investigation. In court, every piece has to be placed in front of a jury and connected clearly enough that the story cannot fall apart under pressure. Prosecutors argued that Martinez-Hernandez was the man Rachel crossed paths with on August 5, 2023. They walked the jury through the Ma and Pa trail, the evidence collected after Rachel was found, the DNA link to the Los Angeles case, and the search that eventually led police to Oklahoma. The defense tried to raise doubt. That was their job. But the case against him held. His denial that he had ever been in Maryland became harder to believe once investigators showed what they had found on his phone, including searches connected to Bel Air and images of Rachel Morin. On April 14, 2025, the jury reached a verdict. Victor Martinez-Hernandez was found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder, first-degree rape, third-degree sexual offense, and kidnapping. For Rachel's family, that verdict mattered because it put an official answer on the record. The man arrested in Tulsa was not just a suspect anymore. A jury had decided he was responsible. Still, the case was not fully finished until sentencing. On August 11, 2025, Martinez-Hernandez returned to court. This time, the question was not whether he had killed Rachel. That had already been decided. The question was what punishment he would receive. The judge sentenced him to life without the possibility of parole, plus an additional life sentence and 40 more years. That meant he would never return to normal life. For the public, that was the ending people could point to. An arrest. A trial. A guilty verdict. A sentence. For Rachel's family, it was not that simple. The punishment did not bring Rachel back. It did not give her children another day with their mother. It did not erase the hours when her family searched and waited for an answer nobody wanted. But it did mean the man convicted of killing her would not walk free again. The Ma and Pa trail remained in Bel Air. People still knew where it was. They still passed near it. They still remembered that Rachel had gone there on an ordinary evening and never came home. That is why this case stayed with people. Not because it began somewhere strange. Because it began in a place people thought they knew.